I will never forget the expression on Karen's face that morning. The flashing red and blue lights of the approaching police cruiser painted her perfectly manicured lawn in urgent streaks of color. There she stood, arms folded tightly across her chest, her smug smile stretched wider than ever as she gestured dramatically towards our gated driveway, certain that this was finally her moment of triumph. For weeks, she had made it her mission to harass us. She believed with all her soul that today would be her grand victory. Watching from my security camera feed, I saw the two officers approach cautiously. One of them pressed his earpiece, listening intently, and his brows furrowed with sudden suspicion. He turned to Karen with a firmness that immediately stole the smugness from her face. "Ma'am," he said in a low, authoritative tone, "dispatch is telling us this is a false report. There's no emergency at this address." Karen's jaw dropped open in disbelief, her eyes widening with offended outrage. "That's impossible," she snapped. I heard screaming. "There's something suspicious happening in there." Her voice rose to that sharp, shrill pitch I had come to dread every time she spoke. But what Karen didn't know, what she could never have imagined in her wildest HOA fantasies, was that the 911 dispatcher who took her call was my wife, Elaine. 3 months earlier, my wife and I had finally moved into our dream home, a beautiful modern farmhouse perched peacefully on the edge of Oakwood Estates. It was everything we had ever wanted. Technically, our property sat outside the HOA's official boundaries, but the entrance shared the same street as the community's main gate. The previous owners had emphasized this detail repeatedly during the sale. We weren't under HOA jurisdiction. We had the legal documentation to prove it, but none of that mattered to Karen Wilkins. From the very first week we moved in, Karen, the self-declared president of the HOA, took it upon herself to make our lives a living nightmare. It started with a knock on the door one crisp morning. I opened it to find her standing there, clipboard in hand, wearing a tight-lipped smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped sweetly, though her gaze was already scanning our porch, our driveway, our garden, hunting for something to criticize. "I just wanted to let you know," she continued, flipping through her clipboard with practice drama, "that your mailbox doesn't meet community standards. You'll need to replace it within 7 days." I chuckled politely and explained that our property wasn't part of the HOA. I even offered to show her the legal paperwork confirming that. But she waved me off with a dismissive flick of her hand. "That's a common misconception," she replied, her laugh dripping with condescension. "All homes in this visual corridor are subject to our aesthetic guidelines. I'll leave you this copy of our rulebook." Before I could say another word, she thrust a massive 3-ring binder into my hands. Later that night, Elaine and I flipped through it in stunned silence. Over 100 pages of painfully specific rules. From the acceptable shades of beige you could paint your exterior walls to the maximum height a garden gnome was allowed to stand. It would have been almost comical if it hadn't been real. The following week, she was back again. This time she was furious about our landscaping. A week later, it was the porch lights being too bright for community harmony. Each time, I reminded her calmly that our house was not part of the HOA. Each time, her frustration burned brighter behind her fake smile. My wife suggested we simply ignore her, which worked, but only for about 2 days. Soon Karen began leaving typed violation notices taped to our mailbox. Then came the photos. Dozens of them. She would stand across the street with her phone held high, taking pictures of every angle of our home, our cars, our flower beds. Sometimes, she spent 10 or 15 minutes meticulously documenting our property, hunting for anything she could call a violation. One particularly insane morning, I walked outside to find her driveway blocked. Karen had parked her HOA-branded golf cart right across it and was standing there with a tape measure, checking the height of our hedges. When I asked her to move, she launched into a 20-minute lecture about civic responsibility and neighborhood standards. I knew then that ignoring her wouldn't work. 2 days later, we received a certified letter stating we owed $750 in HOA fines. That was the final straw. I decided it was time to set a boundary. I installed a wrought iron security gate at the end of our driveway. Nothing extravagant, just a sturdy gate with a keypad entry system and a small intercom speaker. But the message was clear: our property is private. Stay out. Karen was livid. She left voicemails demanding the gate code for emergency inspections. She cited non-existent community safety codes and threatened legal action. I saved every voicemail, every note, every typed violation. My wife, ever practical in crisis as an emergency dispatcher, quietly suggested we might eventually need a restraining order if Karen escalated further. But nothing prepared us for what happened next. One morning, while working from home, the gate buzzer rang incessantly. I checked the camera feed. Karen stood there, her finger jammed against the buzzer, face twisted with determination and rage. Reluctantly, I pressed the intercom button. "Karen," I sighed, already weary. "What do you need today?" "You need to open this gate immediately," she barked without so much as a greeting. "I've received a complaint about your property and need to conduct an inspection." I rubbed my temples, feeling the headache rising. "Karen, we've been over this countless times. You have no legal authority to inspect our home. Please stop harassing us." Her face darkened with fury. "Don't you dare tell me what my authority is," she snapped, her voice trembling. "I've been president of this association for 7 years. Open this gate now, or there will be consequences." "I'm working, Karen. Please leave, or I will report you for harassment." "You'll regret this," she hissed before storming back to her golf cart, her tires screeching slightly on the concrete. I thought that would be the end of it for the day. I was wrong. Barely 20 minutes later, my security camera alerted me to movement at the gate. When I checked, I saw Karen pacing back and forth, her phone pressed tightly to her ear, gesturing wildly towards our home. I turned up the camera audio just in time to hear her screech. "Yes, I need police immediately. I heard screaming coming from inside this house, and now they're refusing to open the gate. I think someone might be hurt." The address is 4287 Oakwood Drive. My blood ran cold. She had just called 911 with a completely false report to force her way onto our property. I immediately tried calling Elaine at work, but she didn't answer. She was often too busy on duty to take personal calls. All I could do was wait, watching Karen pace in front of the gate, glaring triumphantly at the camera as if she'd just delivered her final winning move. What I didn't know was that Elaine had been the dispatcher to answer Karen's 911 call. The moment Karen began speaking, Elaine recognized her voice instantly. After all, Karen had come to our door so many times with the same screeching entitlement. More importantly, Elaine recognized our address immediately. Following protocol, she couldn't just dismiss the call, but she could note it as a potentially false report and dispatch officers for a welfare check rather than an emergency response. She also made sure to include in the notes that the caller was a known harasser of the residents. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up to the gate. Karen rushed over to them dramatically, pointing at our house with the fervor of a medieval witch hunter. I decided to meet them at the gate. I walked out, punching in the code to exit, leaving the gate closed behind me to keep Karen off her property. "Officers," I began calmly, holding out my ID. "I'm the homeowner. There is absolutely no emergency here. This woman has been harassing us for months, tried to enforce HOA rules that do not apply to our property." One officer nodded, slightly before touching his earpiece again. His expression shifted as he listened to something relayed from dispatch. "Sir," he asked, "is your wife Elaine Miller?" "Yes," I replied, surprised. "She's on dispatch right now and has provided us with some important context about this situation," he explained. Then he turned to Karen, whose smug face immediately began to falter. "Ma'am, did you call 911 reporting screams and a possible emergency at this address?" "Yes," she insisted, her voice rising to its shrill peak. "They wouldn't open the gate. There could be someone hurt in there. The officer's jaw tightened. Ma'am, the dispatcher who took your call is this gentleman's wife. She has informed us that you have been repeatedly harassing this family over HOA matters despite their property being outside your jurisdiction. She also confirms there was no emergency when you called. Karen's face paled, her eyes darting around wildly. That's not true, she shrieked. She's covering for him. I heard something. She's lying to protect her husband. The second officer stepped forward, holding a small notepad. Ma'am, all 911 calls are recorded. Your exact words are documented. Dispatch also noted you have made similar claims about other residents in the past when they refused your HOA demands. By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and relief. For the first time, Karen seemed utterly speechless. Karen Wilkins, the first officer said in a formal voice, you're under arrest for filing a false police report and misuse of emergency services. These are serious charges. As he read her rights, Karen's expression cycled through shock, outrage, and finally, a trembling fear. This is ridiculous, she stammered. I'm the president of the Homeowners Association. You can't arrest me for looking out for my community. But they could, and they did. As the officers gently but firmly guided her towards the patrol car, Karen turned back, glaring at me with pure venom. This isn't over, she spat through gritted teeth. Actually, Karen, I replied, my voice calm and resolute. I think it is. The gathered neighbors stood silently as Karen was placed into the back of the cruiser. One older gentleman, who lived 3 houses down, slowly approached me with a hesitant smile. We've been wanting to say something about her for years, he whispered quietly. No one ever had the courage to stand up to her. Thank you. After giving my statement to the officers, I finally got hold of Elaine during her break. She confirmed everything I had suspected. The moment she started talking, Elaine said, exhausted but triumphant, I knew it was her. I made sure every part of her false report was documented. 3 weeks later, Karen stood before a judge. Our documentation of her relentless harassment was presented in full detail. The court found her guilty of filing a false police report and misusing emergency services. She was fined $5,000, sentenced to a year of probation, and ordered to complete 200 hours of community service. But the final poetic justice came from within her own empire. The HOA called an emergency meeting, and by unanimous vote, Karen was stripped of her title as president. As she was escorted out, her face twisted with confusion and rage. For the first time in her reign of petty tyranny, she was completely powerless. And as for Elaine and me, we finally enjoyed our peaceful mornings on the porch, coffee in hand, breathing in the freedom we had fought for, knowing that sometimes the universe delivers justice with flashing red and blue lights and a dispatcher wife who knows exactly how to handle a Karen.